The blood-soaked sunset painted the Arizona sky crimson as Braxton Mills rode into Springerville, a town hanging onto civilization by its fingernails in the unforgiving territory of 1877. His weather-beaten face revealed little emotion as he led his exhausted Appaloosa down the main street, the distinctive jingle of his spurs announcing his arrival to those who knew the sound of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. The journey from Colorado had been long and punishing, but necessary. After the debacle at the Silver Creek mine, Braxton needed someplace where nobody knew his name or the price that might be on his head. Springerville seemed as good a place as any to disappear for a while. The small settlement nestled in Apache County was far enough from his troubles, but still offered the basic necessities a man required: whiskey, occasional work, and people who minded their own business. Dust caked his throat as he dismounted in front of the livery stable. The late September heat still hung in the air, though the approaching evening promised some relief. Braxton removed his hat and wiped his brow with his sleeve, revealing hair the color of sun-bleached wheat that had once been neatly trimmed but now curled past his collar. "Need boarding for the night," he said to the stable boy who approached. The young man couldn't have been more than 16, all gangly limbs and freckles. "That'll be 2 bits, mister. Extra if you want him groomed." Braxton dug into his pocket and produced the coins. "Give him a good rub-down and extra feed. He's earned it." After securing accommodations for his horse, Braxton headed toward the only establishment that seemed to be doing any business, the Watering Hole Saloon. Its weathered sign swung in the evening breeze, and the glow of oil lamps spilled out onto the boardwalk. The familiar sounds of a piano badly in need of tuning, boisterous laughter, and the clink of glasses called to him like a siren's song. He pushed through the swinging doors and paused, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim interior. The saloon was crowded but not packed, filled with the usual assortment of cowboys, miners, and local businessmen seeking relief from the day's labors. Braxton made his way to the bar, his path clearing as men instinctively sensed the dangerous aura he carried. "Whiskey," he said to the barkeep, a round-faced man with an impressive mustache. "Leave the bottle." As the barkeep set a glass and bottle before him, the saloon doors swung open again. A hush fell over the room, drawing Braxton's attention. A woman entered, and not just any woman. She wore a simple dress of deep blue, modest compared to the painted ladies who worked the establishment, yet she commanded more attention than all of them combined. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a practical bun, though a few rebellious strands framed a face of striking beauty. She moved with purpose, scanning the room until her eyes, a remarkable shade of green, landed on Braxton. Without hesitation, she approached. "Mr. Mills?" she asked, her voice clear and confident. Braxton tensed. Nobody in Springerville should know his name. His hand instinctively moved closer to his holster. "Who's asking?" he replied, voice low and guarded. "Tessa Zimmerman. I need to speak with you privately." She glanced around at the curious onlookers. "I've been told you're the man to see about certain problems." "You've been misinformed, madam. I'm just passing through." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Please, Mr. Mills, I can make it worth your while. 5 minutes of your time is all I ask." Against his better judgment, Braxton found himself intrigued. He gestured to an empty table in the corner, bringing his bottle and glass with him. Once seated, he studied her more carefully. Up close, he could see the determination in her eyes, but also something else: desperation. "How do you know my name?" he demanded once they were seated. "Vernon Holcomb. He was a friend of my father's. He said if I ever needed help of a specific nature, you were reliable." Braxton's jaw tightened. "Vernon's dead." "Yes," she replied, sorrow flickering across her face. 3 months ago, consumption took him. That explained why Vernon hadn't warned him she might come looking. Braxton poured himself a drink and downed it quickly. "What kind of help are you looking for, Miss Zimmerman?" "I own a small ranch about 10 miles east of town. The Lazy Z. It was my father's, but he passed last year. Since then, I've been trying to keep it going, but—" She paused, composing herself. "A man named Randall Blackstone wants my land, says it's perfect for his railroad plans. I've refused to sell, so now he's trying to force me out." "And what exactly do you expect me to do about that?" "Protect my property. Protect me." Her voice remained steady. "I can pay you $50 a month plus room and board." Braxton laughed without humor. "Lady, if this Blackstone has railroad money behind him, you're fighting a losing battle. And I'm not looking for work, especially not as a ranch hand or bodyguard. I'm not asking you to be a ranch hand. I need someone who knows how to handle trouble when it comes calling, the kind of trouble that wears guns and doesn't mind using them." Her directness surprised him. Most women of her apparent breeding wouldn't speak so plainly about such matters. Braxton studied her for a long moment, noting the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work, contrasting with the refined way she carried herself. "Why me? Springerville must have plenty of men looking for work." "Because Vernon said you were the best, said you fought in the war, worked as a lawman and knew how to handle yourself in a fight, said you had principles, even if you didn't always show them." Braxton scoffed. "Vernon talked too much. And if he told you all that, he should have also mentioned I work alone. I don't get involved in other people's problems." "Is that so?" Tessa leaned forward. "Then why did you help the Parkers over in Durango when land grabbers tried to run them off? Or the mining town of Silverton when outlaws took over? Vernon told me those stories too." Braxton's expression darkened. "Vernon should have kept his mouth shut. Those situations were different. How? People needed help, you provided it. And each time it cost me." He refilled his glass. "I'm not a hired gun, Miss Zimmerman. I'm not asking you to be one. I'm asking for your help." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "Just come see the ranch, meet my people. If you still want to walk away after that, I won't stop you." Before Braxton could respond, the saloon doors burst open again. 3 men entered, their expressions hard, their intentions clear from the way they swaggered in and surveyed the room. The lead man, tall with a scar running down his right cheek, spotted Tessa and grinned unpleasantly. "Well, well. Miss Zimmerman gracing us with her presence in town. Did you reconsider Mr. Blackstone's offer?" Tessa stiffened but didn't turn around. "My answer hasn't changed, Harper. It never will." The man named Harper approached their table, flanked by his companions. "Mr. Blackstone's getting impatient. Price goes down every time you refuse." His eyes flicked to Braxton. "Who's this?" "New ranch hand." "Just a traveler," Braxton replied evenly, though his posture had subtly shifted, ready for trouble. Harper sneered. "Word of advice, traveler. The Lazy Z is bad luck. 2 ranch hands dead in accidents this month alone. Miss Zimmerman here can't keep help because they end up in pine boxes." "Is that a threat, Harper?" Tessa asked, her voice tight with anger. "Just stating facts, madam. Railroads coming through with or without your cooperation." Harper leaned down, his foul breath washing over them. "You've got 1 week to accept the offer, or we won't be responsible for what happens next." Braxton remained still, but his eyes had gone cold. "You've delivered your message. Now move along." Harper straightened, taking Braxton's measure. Whatever he saw made him reconsider his next words. With a final glare at Tessa, he jerked his head toward the door and his men followed him out. When they were gone, Tessa released a breath she'd been holding. "That's what I'm dealing with. They've poisoned my well, shot my cattle, and scared off most of my ranch hands." Braxton swirled the amber liquid in his glass. contemplating. His instincts told him to walk away. He'd seen enough trouble to last several lifetimes and had the scars to prove it. But something about the quiet dignity with which Tessa Zimmerman faced her problems stirred something in him. "One day," he finally said, "I'll ride out tomorrow, look at your situation. That's all I'm promising." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you. I'll be ready at first light." "I'll find you," he replied. "Now go on home before those men decide to follow you." Tessa nodded and rose from the table. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Mills." Braxton watched her leave, wondering what he was getting himself into. When she was gone, he poured another drink and considered his options. He could still ride out tonight, leave Springerville and its problems behind. But the mention of Vernon's name had stirred old loyalties, and the look in Tessa Zimmerman's eyes had awakened something he thought long dead. By the time dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Braxton had made his decision. He collected his horse from the livery and rode to the modest hotel where Tessa had mentioned she would be staying. She was already waiting outside, dressed in practical riding clothes, her hair secured in a braid. A sturdy mare stood beside her, loaded with supplies. "You came," she said, not quite hiding her surprise. "I said I would." He adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Lead the way, Miss Zimmerman." The ride to the Lazy Z took just over 2 hours. As they traveled, Braxton observed the land with a critical eye. It was good grazing territory, with access to water and natural boundaries that would make it ideal for cattle. No wonder Blackstone wanted it for his railroad. Tessa rode well, sitting her horse with the ease of someone who'd been in the saddle since childhood. She pointed out landmarks and boundaries as they went, speaking with obvious pride and knowledge of the land. "My father came here in '58, she explained. "Built everything from nothing. By the time I was born in '55, he'd already established one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory." "And your mother," a shadow crossed her face. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her during a harsh winter. It's been just me and Pa since then until last year. No siblings, a brother, Thomas. He left for California in '70. We haven't heard from him since." As they crested a hill, the Lazy Z came into view. The ranch house was substantial, 2 stories of sturdy timber construction with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings surrounded it, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and corral. A handful of men were visible, working with cattle or tending to repairs. It was impressive but clearly showing signs of strain. The fence along the eastern boundary was partially broken, and one of the outbuildings appeared to have suffered fire damage. "How many hands do you have left?" Braxton asked as they approached. "5. Down from 15 last year. Most left after Pa died and Blackstone's threats drove away the rest." Her voice remained steady, but Braxton could hear the underlying strain. "The ones who stayed are loyal, but they're not fighters. They're cowboys." They rode into the ranch yard, drawing the attention of a gray-haired man who emerged from the barn. His weathered face broke into a smile when he saw Tessa, though his expression grew cautious when his eyes landed on Braxton. "Miss Tessa," he called, approaching as they dismounted. "Didn't expect you back so soon. Walter, this is Mr. Braxton Mills. He's here to assess our situation." She turned to Braxton. "Walter Simmons is my foreman. Been with the Lazy Z since before I was born." Walter nodded, extending a calloused hand. "Mr. Mills." Braxton shook it, noting the firm grip. "Any trouble while Miss Zimmerman was in town?" Walter exchanged a glance with Tessa. "Nothing unusual, though riders were spotted along the North Ridge yesterday, just watching." "Blackstone's men," Tessa explained. "They've been doing that for weeks. Watching, waiting." After stabling their horses, Tessa gave Braxton a tour of the ranch. Up close, the damage was more evident. Fence posts had been deliberately broken, not weathered. The burned-out building had been the smokehouse, and Walter confirmed it had been no accident. "Found coal oil traces," the foreman said grimly. "Set while we were busy with a stampede they likely caused." By midday, Braxton had seen enough. They stood on the porch, looking out over the property. Despite the signs of sabotage, the Lazy Z was still functioning. Cattle grazed in the distance, the creek provided ample water, and the main structures remained sound. "How much did Blackstone offer?" Braxton asked. "Half what it's worth," Tessa replied. "And that was his generous offer. And you won't sell because—" Her green eyes flashed with determination. "This is my home, Mr. Mills, my father's legacy. Every nail, every board, every acre was his dream, our dream. I won't let some railroad baron take it just because he can." Braxton nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But you should know, standing against men like Blackstone usually ends one way." "I'm aware of the risks. Are you? Because those men in town weren't just messengers. They're killers. Blackstone didn't hire them for their conversational skills." "Which is precisely why I need someone like you," Tessa countered. "I can't fight them alone, but I won't surrender without a fight either." Braxton considered her words. He'd seen this scenario play out before, powerful interests squeezing out smaller landowners for progress and profit. It rarely ended well for the little man, but there was something about Tessa Zimmerman's quiet determination that resonated with him. "If I stay," he said carefully, "there are conditions. First, I'm in charge of security. That means what I say goes, no arguments. Second, you need to understand that my presence might escalate things before they get better. Blackstone will see it as a challenge. I understand. Third," he continued, "I need to know everything about Blackstone, his operations, his men, his habits. Knowledge is advantage." Tessa nodded. "Walter can tell you what we know. He's been gathering information. And finally, you need to have a backup plan. If things go south, you need somewhere safe to go." A small smile crossed her face. "Mr. Mills, I appreciate your concern, but I have no intention of going anywhere. This is my land. I'll defend it to my last breath if necessary." Braxton sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Show me where I'll be staying." For the next 3 days, Braxton familiarized himself with every inch of the Lazy Z. He rode the boundaries, mapped defensible positions, and assessed the skills of the remaining ranch hands. They were good men, loyal to Tessa, but as she had said, they were cowboys, not gunfighters. Walter proved to be a valuable source of information. The foreman had been discreetly gathering intelligence on Blackstone's operations since the trouble began. "He's got about 20 men on his payroll," Walter explained as they sat in the bunkhouse one evening. "Most are just ranch hands and laborers for his legitimate businesses. But at least 8 are hired guns, including Harper and his boys you met in town." "What legitimate businesses?" Braxton asked, cleaning his Colt revolvers methodically. "He owns the bank in Springerville, has interests in the general store, and runs the stage line to Hallbrook. Man's got his fingers in everything. Claims the railroad contract will bring prosperity to the whole region." Braxton nodded. "And it probably will. That's what makes men like him dangerous. They wrap their greed in progress and make it hard to stand against them." On the 4th day, Braxton was helping repair the corral when he spotted riders approaching 3 men, coming fast. He called a warning and positioned himself on the porch, rifle in hand, as Tessa emerged from the house. "Stay inside," he ordered, but she ignored him, taking her place beside him with a shotgun. "My ranch, Mr. Mills," she reminded him calmly. The riders pulled up short of the house, and Braxton recognized Harper among them. The scarred man smirked when he saw Braxton. "So the traveler found work after all," Harper called. Mr. Blackstone would like a word with Miss Zimmerman. He's offering a final chance to sell before things get unpleasant. Miss Zimmerman isn't interested, Braxton replied evenly. The lady can speak for herself, Harper snapped. Tessa stepped forward. My answer remains the same, Harper. The Lazy Z is not for sale. Not now, not ever. Harper's face darkened. Mr. Blackstone figured you'd say that. That's why he asked me to deliver a demonstration. He nodded to one of his companions, who produced a torch and lit it. You burn one more building on this property and you won't leave alive, Braxton warned, raising his rifle. Harper laughed. We ain't burning buildings today. He gestured to the distant pasture. That herd of cattle looks mighty fine. Be a shame if something happened to them. Before Braxton could respond, the third rider threw something into the dry grass near the house. Smoke immediately began to rise as flames licked at the parched vegetation, spreading rapidly in the direction of the grazing cattle. Next time it won't be just grass, Harper called as they wheeled their horses around. 1 week, Miss Zimmerman. Braxton fired a shot over their heads as they retreated, then turned his attention to the growing fire. Walter, fire in the south pasture, he shouted. The next hours were a frantic battle against the flames. The entire ranch mobilized, using blankets, shovels, and buckets of water to contain the blaze before it could reach the herd or structures. By sunset, they had succeeded, though everyone was exhausted and smoke-stained. Tessa sat on the porch steps, her face smudged with soot, staring out at the blackened landscape. Braxton settled beside her, offering a canteen of water. This is just the beginning, he said quietly after she had drunk. You understand that, she nodded wearily. I know. But I won't be bullied off my land. They could have killed your cattle today. Next time it might be one of your men or you. Tessa turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the dying light. What would you do, Mr. Mills, if this was your home, your legacy? Braxton considered the question. I don't have either, Miss Zimmerman. Haven't for a long time. And why is that? She asked softly. He looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Some men aren't meant for roots. Some burdens are easier to carry when you're always moving. That sounds lonely. It can be, he admitted. But it's simpler. Tessa was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that anything worth having never comes simply. The harder the fight, the more precious the victory. Braxton almost smiled. Your father sounds like a wise man, he was, and stubborn. I come by it honestly. She stood, brushing ash from her skirt. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. As she turned to go inside, Braxton called after her, Miss Zimmerman. She paused, looking back. I'll need to go into town tomorrow, gather information, see what Blackstone's next move might be. Of course, Walter can accompany you. I work better alone. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. As you wish, just be careful. Blackstone has eyes everywhere in Springerville. The following morning, Braxton rode out early, armed with Walter's descriptions of Blackstone's key men and businesses. Springerville appeared peaceful in the morning light, but Braxton knew appearances could be deceiving. His first stop was the general store, where he purchased ammunition and supplies while casually engaging the shopkeeper in conversation. New to these parts? The shopkeeper asked, wrapping Braxton's purchases. Passing through, doing some work for the Lazy Z in the meantime. The man's friendly demeanor cooled noticeably. Zimmerman Place, heard they're having some troubles. Nothing they can't handle, Braxton replied casually, noting the man's reaction. Might be easier if Miss Zimmerman saw reason. Railroads coming whether folks like it or not. Progress waits for no man. Or woman. Or perhaps the railroad could find another route, Braxton suggested. The shopkeeper shook his head. Not according to Mr. Blackstone. Says the survey's already done and the Lazy Z sits right where the line needs to go. Something about the grade being optimal through that property. Interesting, Braxton thought. He finished his transaction and moved on to the saloon, finding it relatively empty in the morning hours. The bartender from his first night recognized him. Back in town already. Thought you might have moved on. Not yet, Braxton replied, ordering coffee instead of whiskey. Found some work. With the Zimmerman woman, I heard. The bartender leaned in. Word of advice, friend, don't get too comfortable out there. That situation's coming to a head and soon. What makes you say that? The bartender glanced around before speaking lower. Blackstone brought in new men yesterday. Hard cases from Tombstone. Not the type you hire for peaceful negotiations. Braxton absorbed this information with a growing sense of urgency. Any idea when they might make a move? Can't say for sure. But Blackstone's hosting some big railroad executives tonight at his place north of town. Probably wants to show progress on securing the right-of-way. After finishing his coffee, Braxton made his way to the sheriff's office. If law enforcement was in Blackstone's pocket, he needed to know. Sheriff Thomas Wilkins was a heavyset man in his 50s, with a salt and pepper mustache and tired eyes that had seen too much. He looked up from his desk as Braxton entered. "Help you?" he asked without much interest. "Just introducing myself. Braxton Mills, working out at the Lazy Z for a spell." The sheriff's expression sharpened. "Mills, heard that name before." "Common enough," Braxton replied easily. "Maybe." Wilkins studied him. "Miss Zimmerman hiring new hands, is she?" "Security, actually." A knowing look crossed the sheriff's face. "I see. Well, Mr. Mills, I'd appreciate it if your security work doesn't create problems in my jurisdiction. I'm just looking to prevent problems, Sheriff, not cause them." "Good to hear. Because while I sympathize with Miss Zimmerman's situation, I won't tolerate lawlessness from either side." Braxton nodded, assessing the man. "Fair enough. Where do you stand on Blackstone's methods?" The sheriff sighed heavily. "I stand for the law, Mr. Mills. When it's broken, I act. But intimidation that stays just within legal boundaries. There's not much I can do about that. And if it crosses those boundaries, then I'll be the first one out there." Wilkins leaned forward. "For what it's worth, I don't approve of forcing anyone off their land. But I'm one man with limited authority against money and influence. Choose your battles carefully." Braxton left the sheriff's office with mixed feelings. Wilkins seemed honest enough, but his ability to help would be limited if Blackstone's men moved against the Lazy Z in force. His final stop was the bank. The imposing stone building stood at the center of town, a symbol of permanence and prosperity. Inside, Braxton observed the operations while pretending to inquire about opening an account. A large portrait hung on the wall behind the teller's counter, a stern-faced man in his 60s with cold eyes and an impressive beard. Randall Blackstone, presumably. As Braxton turned to leave, a well-dressed man descended the stairs from the second floor. He matched Walter's description of Blackstone's right-hand man, James Mercer. "Good day, sir," Mercer said with practiced politeness. "Are you being assisted?" "Just looking," Braxton replied, "considering where to keep my earnings." Mercer smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're new to Springerville." It wasn't a question. "Just arrived, working out at the Lazy Z for a time." "Ah," Mercer's smile tightened. "Miss Zimmerman's place, a beautiful property, shame about her situation." "What situation is that?" Braxton asked innocently. "The railroad, of course." "Progress waits for no one, and that property is crucial." Mercer studied Braxton more carefully. "You have the look of a man who's seen his share of trouble, Mr. Mills, and trouble has a way of finding some folks more than others." "Indeed it does." Mercer straightened his already impeccable vest. "Well, Mr. Mills, I hope you find Springerville to your liking during your temporary stay." The emphasis on temporary wasn't subtle. Braxton nodded and took his leave, feeling Mercer's eyes on his back as he exited the bank. By mid-afternoon, Braxton had gathered enough information to confirm his suspicions. Blackstone was preparing to force the issue with the Lazy Z, likely after his meeting with the railroad executives. The town was divided but largely intimidated into supporting Blackstone, or at least not opposing him openly. As Braxton prepared to return to the ranch, a commotion near the livery stable caught his attention. A woman's voice, raised in distress, drew him toward the sound. To his surprise, he found Tessa confronting Harper and another of Blackstone's men beside her wagon. "You have no right to search my purchases," she was saying, standing her ground despite being significantly outnumbered. "Just doing our civic duty, Miss Zimmerman," Harper replied with mock politeness, "making sure no firearms or ammunition are being transported illegally." "Since when is buying supplies illegal?" Tessa demanded. "Step away from my wagon," Harper laughed. "Or what? You'll report me to the sheriff." "Blackstone owns this town, lady. Sooner you accept that, the better." Braxton approached slowly, making his presence known with deliberate footsteps. "Problem here." Harper's hand moved instinctively toward his gun but stopped when he recognized Braxton. "Private business, Mills. Move along." "Doesn't look private to me," Braxton replied, positioning himself beside Tessa. "Looks like harassment." The second man, younger and clearly nervous, muttered something to Harper, who scowled but stepped back from the wagon. "This isn't over," Harper warned. "Blackstone wants to see you tonight, Miss Zimmerman, at his home. 7 o'clock. Says it's your last chance to negotiate like civilized folks." "Tell Mr. Blackstone I'll consider his invitation," Tessa replied coolly. After the men departed, Braxton turned to Tessa. "What are you doing in town?" "I thought we agreed you'd stay at the ranch. We needed supplies, and I don't recall agreeing to be confined to my property." Her chin lifted defiantly, but Braxton could see she was shaken by the encounter. "It's not safe for you here," he insisted, helping her into the wagon seat. Blackstone's brought in new men, professional gun hands from Tombstone. Tessa's confidence faltered slightly. "All the more reason to meet with him tonight. Perhaps I can reason with him directly without his thugs interfering." "It's a trap," Braxton said flatly. "He wants you there after dark, vulnerable. Or maybe he genuinely wants to negotiate. Men like Blackstone don't negotiate unless they hold all the cards." Braxton climbed up beside her on the wagon. "We're heading back to the ranch now." For once, Tessa didn't argue. As they left town, Braxton explained what he'd learned about Blackstone's plans and the upcoming visit from railroad executives. "That explains his urgency," Tessa reasoned. "He needs to show progress to his financial backers, which makes him even more dangerous," Braxton warned. Desperate men take desperate measures. By the time they reached the Lazy Z, Braxton had formulated a plan. He gathered Walter and the remaining ranch hands in the main house after supper. "Blackstone's likely to make his move tomorrow or the next day," he explained. "We need to be ready. Walter, I want the cattle moved to the north pasture, away from the main road. Davis and Johnson, you'll reinforce the approaches to the house and barn. Martinez, you're our best shot with a rifle. I want you on watch tonight from the windmill tower." The men nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What about Blackstone's invitation?" Tessa asked from the doorway. "You're not going," Braxton stated firmly. "It might be our only chance to resolve this peacefully." "There won't be anything peaceful about it," Braxton countered. "Blackstone's not inviting you to tea, Miss Zimmerman. He's luring you into a situation where he controls everything." Tessa seemed ready to argue but instead nodded reluctantly. "Very well. What do you suggest instead? We prepare, we watch, and when they come, we're ready." Braxton looked around at the assembled men. "They'll expect us to be afraid, to hesitate. We can't afford either." As the meeting broke up, Tessa asked Braxton to remain behind. When they were alone, she poured 2 glasses of her father's whiskey and handed one to him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done already." Braxton accepted the drink but shook his head. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Zimmerman. The hard part's still coming." "Tessa," she said, "after all this, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." He nodded, oddly touched by the gesture. "Tessa, then." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks. The house creaked and settled around them, the familiar sounds of a home that had stood against many storms, both natural and man-made. "May I ask you something personal?" Tessa finally said. Braxton tensed but nodded. "Vernon told my father you were once a lawman, a marshal in Kansas. What happened?" Braxton stared into his glass, memories flooding back that he usually kept carefully locked away. "I was, for a time. Dodge City, not a job that encourages longevity." "Is that why you left? The danger?" He gave a bitter laugh. "No, the danger was acceptable. It was the cost that wasn't." "Cost?" Braxton hesitated, then decided she deserved some truth from him. "I had a wife, Beth, and a son, not quite 2 years old. While I was tracking a gang that had robbed the bank, their friends paid a visit to my home." His voice grew flat, emotionless, the only way he could tell it. "By the time I got back, it was too late. They'd burned the house with Beth and my boy inside." Tessa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "Oh, Braxton, I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, 15 years in May." He finished his whiskey in one swallow. "I hunted down every man responsible. Then I turned in my badge and never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots again." "And that's why you said love isn't for you," Tessa said softly, "when I first approached you in the saloon." He nodded, remembering his bitter response when she'd mentioned finding someone to help around the ranch more permanently. "Love brings obligation. Obligation brings vulnerability. I can't afford either. That's a lonely way to live. It's a safe way to live." Braxton set down his empty glass. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will test us all." As he rose to leave, Tessa caught his hand. "Thank you for telling me. It helps me understand." Her touch was warm and surprisingly strong, the hand of a woman who worked alongside her men when needed. Braxton felt an unexpected jolt at the contact and gently withdrew his hand. "Good night, Tessa." "Good night, Braxton." He spent the night on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. His conversation with Tessa had unsettled him, bringing back memories he'd spent years trying to bury. But it had also awakened something else, a realization that he'd been running for so long. He'd forgotten what it was like to stand and fight for something meaningful. Dawn arrived with no sign of trouble, but Braxton didn't relax his vigilance. He organized the ranch hands into shifts, ensuring someone was always watching the approaches to the property. By mid-morning, Walter reported that the cattle had been successfully moved to the northern pasture, where they would be less vulnerable to sabotage. Around noon, a lone rider approached from town. Not Harper or any of Blackstone's known men, but a young boy, barely in his teens, riding a mule and looking nervous. "Message for Miss Zimmerman," the boy announced when Braxton intercepted him at the gate. "I'll take it," Braxton said, but Tessa had already emerged from the house. "It's all right, Braxton." She approached the boy with a kind smile. "What is it, Jimmy?" The boy produced an envelope from his jacket. "Mr. Blackstone asked me to deliver this personal-like, said it's important." Tessa accepted the envelope, rewarding the messenger with a coin. After the boy departed, she opened the letter and read it silently, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "What does it say?" Braxton asked when she finished. Tessa handed him the letter. The handwriting was elegant, the paper expensive. Miss Zimmerman, I regret your decision to decline my invitation last evening. I had hoped we might resolve our differences in a civilized manner. However, your absence, coupled with your continued refusal to acknowledge the inevitable, forces my hand. The railroad commissioners have approved the route through your property. Construction begins in 1 week. You have until sundown tomorrow to accept my final offer of $5,000 for the Lazy Z. After that, I cannot guarantee the safety of your property or those who reside upon it. This is not a threat, but a reality of progress. The railroad will come through, with or without your cooperation. Respectfully, Randall Blackstone. Braxton folded the letter carefully. $5,000. More than his previous offer. Yes, Tessa confirmed, but still less than half its true value. You could start over somewhere else with that money. Her eyes flashed. Is that what you're suggesting I do? Take his blood money and run? I'm suggesting you consider all your options, Braxton replied calmly. Fighting might cost more than land. This isn't just about land. Tessa's voice rose with passion. It's about right and wrong. It's about not letting men like Blackstone believe they can take whatever they want through intimidation and violence. Braxton studied her for a long moment. You sound like a woman who's made up her mind. I have. Her voice softened slightly. But I won't ask any of you to risk your lives for my principles. If you want to leave, I understand. The same goes for Walter and the others. Braxton almost smiled. I'm not going anywhere, not until this is finished one way or another. Relief flooded her features. Thank you. As the day progressed, tension mounted at the Lazy Z. Braxton positioned the men at strategic points around the property, focusing on the most likely approaches. Walter distributed the limited supply of weapons and ammunition, ensuring everyone could defend themselves if necessary. By late afternoon, there was still no sign of Blackstone's men, but Braxton's instincts told him they were coming. The railroad executives would be in town, expecting Blackstone to deliver on his promises. The pressure would be immense. As dusk approached, Braxton joined Tessa on the porch. She had changed into practical clothing, trousers, boots, and a man's shirt with her hair braided tightly against her head. A shotgun rested against the railing beside her. You should go inside, he advised. If shooting starts, you'll be safer there. This is my fight, Braxton. I won't hide while others defend what's mine. He wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her stance. Instead, he asked, Have you ever fired that shotgun at a man? No, she admitted. But I've killed rattlesnakes and coyotes threatening my chickens. I don't imagine it's so different. It's entirely different, Braxton said quietly. Taking a human life changes you, even when it's necessary. Before Tessa could respond, Martinez called from his lookout position. Riders coming, at least a dozen from the South Road. Braxton immediately shifted into action. Everyone to positions. Walter, get the lanterns doused. I want darkness working for us, not them. As the ranch hands scrambled to their assigned posts, Braxton turned to Tessa one last time. Stay behind me. If I fall, get to the house and bar the door. There's still a chance the sheriff might intervene if things get bad enough. She nodded, her face pale but resolute in the fading light. The riders approached slowly, spreading out as they neared the ranch house. In the lead was a figure Braxton hadn't seen before, a tall man on a magnificent black horse, expensively dressed despite the dust of travel. Randall Blackstone himself, apparently deciding to oversee this operation personally. Harper rode at his right hand, with the hired guns from Tombstone forming a menacing line behind them. They halted just beyond rifle range, and Blackstone raised a hand in greeting. "Miss Zimmerman," he called, "I've come to hear your answer in person." Braxton positioned himself on the porch steps, rifle ready but not aimed. "That's close enough, Blackstone." The railroad man's eyes narrowed as he assessed Braxton. "You must be the hired gun I've heard about. Mills, is it? Your reputation precedes you." "Then you know what happens if your men try anything foolish," Braxton replied evenly. Blackstone smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "There's no need for unpleasantness. I'm a businessman, not a bandit. I've made Miss Zimmerman a fair offer considering the circumstances." "The circumstances being your threats and sabotage," Tessa called from behind Braxton. "The answer is still no, Mr. Blackstone. The Lazy Z is not for sale." Blackstone's face hardened. "I had hoped you might be reasonable, Miss Zimmerman. The railroad commissioners are in town as we speak, expecting me to confirm that the right-of-way has been secured. I cannot disappoint them." "That sounds like your problem, not hers," Braxton interjected. "Perhaps." Blackstone signaled to his men, who began to spread out further, encircling the main house. "But I'm afraid it's about to become everyone's problem. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time." Braxton raised his rifle slightly. "First man who makes a hostile move dies, Blackstone. Starting with you." A tense silence fell over the scene. In the distance, a coyote howled mournfully, the sound carrying clearly in the still evening air. Blackstone appeared to be weighing his options, perhaps realizing for the first time that this might not be as simple as he'd anticipated. "Last chance, Miss Zimmerman," he finally said. $10,000, more than generous for a ranch that will be worthless once the railroad cuts through it. Tessa stepped forward to stand beside Braxton. "My answer remains the same. And if you or your men set foot on my property without invitation, I'll consider it trespassing and respond accordingly." Blackstone's expression darkened with anger. "So be it." He turned to Harper. "Burn the outbuildings, all of them. Let's see how stubborn Miss Zimmerman remains when her livelihood is in ashes." At his command, several riders produced torches, lighting them quickly. "That's far enough," Braxton shouted, taking aim at the nearest man with a torch. The tension broke as one of Blackstone's men spurred his horse forward, torch in hand, heading for the barn. Braxton's shot rang out, striking the man in the shoulder and sending him tumbling from his horse. The torch fell harmlessly to the ground. The sound of the shot was like a starting signal. Gunfire erupted from both sides, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows. Braxton pulled Tessa down behind the porch railing as shots peppered the front of the house. "Get inside," he shouted over the din. For once, she didn't argue, crawling toward the door while Braxton provided covering fire. From various positions around the property, Walter and the ranch hands returned fire, making the most of their defensive positions. Braxton counted at least 3 of Blackstone's men down, but they still held a numerical advantage. Harper had dismounted and was working his way toward the house from the side, using outbuildings as cover. A shout from the barn caught Braxton's attention. One of the ranch hands, Davis, had been hit and was down in the open, vulnerable to further fire. Without hesitation, Braxton sprinted from the porch to the fallen man, bullets kicking up dust around him. He reached Davis and dragged him behind a water trough, just as a bullet struck where the wounded man had been lying. A quick assessment showed the wound wasn't immediately life-threatening, a shot through the meaty part of the thigh. "Pressure here," Braxton instructed, guiding Davis's hands to the wound. "Stay down." As Braxton turned to rejoin the fight, he spotted Harper sneaking toward the back of the house where Tessa would be vulnerable. Changing direction, Braxton moved silently through the shadows, using the confusion of the gunfight as cover. He caught up to Harper just as the scarred man was preparing to enter through the kitchen door. Braxton crashed into him from behind, sending them both tumbling to the ground. Harper's gun skittered away in the darkness as they grappled, each seeking advantage. Despite his lean frame, Harper was surprisingly strong and fought with the desperation of a man who knew failure meant death. He landed a solid blow to Braxton's jaw, momentarily stunning him, and used the opportunity to reach for a knife in his boot. Braxton saw the gleam of steel just in time to catch Harper's wrist as the knife descended toward his chest. They struggled for control of the weapon, muscles straining, neither man willing to yield. With a sudden shift of weight, Braxton managed to flip their positions, pinning Harper beneath him. The knife, still clutched between their hands, hovered between them. "It's not worth dying for, Harper," Braxton grunted through clenched teeth, Harper's face contorted with hatred. "Blackstone will kill me if I fail. Then maybe you're working for the wrong man." With a final surge of strength, Braxton forced the knife away and delivered a knockout blow to Harper's jaw. The scarred man went limp beneath him. Securing Harper's unconscious form with his own belt, Braxton retrieved his rifle and rejoined the fight, which had begun to shift in their favor. The ranch hands, fighting from cover with the advantage of familiarity with the terrain, had managed to drive back several of Blackstone's men. Braxton spotted Blackstone himself, still mounted but now retreating toward the road, apparently unwilling to risk his own skin now that the tide had turned. Taking careful aim, Braxton fired a shot that struck the pommel of Blackstone's saddle, splintering it and causing the horse to rear in panic. Blackstone tumbled ungracefully to the ground as his horse bolted. Suddenly exposed and vulnerable, the railroad man's confidence evaporated. He scrambled to his feet, looking around frantically for assistance, but his men were too occupied with their own survival to help him. Braxton approached steadily, rifle trained on Blackstone's chest. "Call them off," he demanded. Now, fear flickered across Blackstone's face as he realized his predicament. "Harper," he called. "Mercer?" "Harper's indisposed," Braxton informed him coldly. "And Mercer appears to have more sense than loyalty. He's halfway back to town already." Indeed, several of Blackstone's men had begun to retreat, unwilling to die for their employer's ambitions. The gunfire had diminished to occasional shots rather than the previous fusillade. "This isn't over, Mills," Blackstone snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. "The railroad will come through, its progress inevitable." "Maybe," Braxton conceded, "but not through the Lazy Z, not today." He raised his voice. "Anyone still fighting for Blackstone has 1 minute to clear out before we stop shooting to wound and start shooting to kill." The remaining attackers took the warning seriously. Within moments, the sounds of retreating horses filled the night air. Only Blackstone remained, his once immaculate clothing now dusty and torn, his dignity in tatters. From the house, Tessa emerged, shotgun still in hand. She approached slowly, her eyes taking in the scene, the wounded ranch hand being tended by Walter, Harper bound and unconscious by the kitchen door, and Blackstone at Braxton's mercy. "Are you injured?" Braxton asked her without taking his eyes off Blackstone. "No," she replied, her voice steady despite the ordeal. "Davis, he'll live. Flesh wound." Tessa turned her attention to Blackstone. "You came to my home with armed men, you tried to burn my property, you endangered my people. Give me one reason why I shouldn't let Mr. Mills put a bullet in you right now." Blackstone's arrogance resurfaced despite his precarious position. "Because you'd hang for murder, Miss Zimmerman. I have friends in high places." "Self-defense isn't murder," Braxton countered. And attacking a homestead with armed men isn't likely to win you sympathy, even from your railroad friends. Before Blackstone could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Braxton tensed, fearing reinforcements, but relaxed slightly when he recognized Sheriff Wilkins leading several townsmen armed with rifles. What in God's name happened here? The sheriff demanded as he surveyed the aftermath of the battle. Mr. Blackstone decided to press his business interests with firearms and torches, Braxton explained, finally lowering his rifle but keeping a watchful eye on Blackstone. Wilkins dismounted heavily, his face grim as he took in the scene. "That true, Blackstone? These people fired first." Blackstone protested. "We came to negotiate and they opened fire without provocation." "That's a lie," Tessa said firmly. "He ordered his men to burn our buildings. We defended ourselves, nothing more." The sheriff looked skeptical. "Quite a coincidence that I received an anonymous message saying there might be trouble out at the Lazy Z tonight. Rode out with these men just to be sure." His gaze shifted to Harper's bound form. "And I see Harper's involved. Why am I not surprised?" One of the townsmen stepped forward, the doctor, judging by the bag he carried. "Anyone need medical attention?" "One of my men," Tessa said, gesturing toward the barn where Davis was being tended. "Leg wound." As the doctor hurried to assist, Sheriff Wilkins approached Blackstone. "I think you'd better come with me, Mr. Blackstone. Got some questions need answering." "This is outrageous," Blackstone sputtered. "I'm the victim here." "Tell it to the judge," Wilkins replied unsympathetically, producing handcuffs. "Attempted arson, assault with deadly weapons, conspiracy." The list goes on. Those railroad commissioners might not be so impressed now. As the sheriff led Blackstone away, the railroad man turned back to glare at Tessa and Braxton. "This isn't finished," he warned. "The railroad always gets what it wants in the end." "Perhaps," Tessa replied calmly. "But it won't be getting the Lazy Z. Not now, not ever." The cleanup took hours. The doctor treated Davis and two other ranch hands who had suffered minor injuries. Miraculously, no one had been killed, though the property had not escaped damage. Several windows were shattered. The front of the house was pockmarked with bullet holes, and one of the smaller outbuildings had caught fire before being extinguished. By dawn, a semblance of order had been restored. The wounded were resting comfortably, the animals calmed, and the immediate dangers addressed. Braxton found Tessa on the porch, watching the sunrise, a cup of coffee clutched in her hands. "You should get some rest," he suggested, accepting the cup she offered from the pot beside her. "I could say the same to you," she smiled tiredly. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't been here." Braxton shrugged. "You'd have found another way. You're not the type to surrender easily." "Perhaps, but I'm grateful it didn't come to that." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "What happens now? Blackstone will face charges, but don't expect him to serve time. Men like that rarely do. His reputation will suffer, though, and the railroad commissioners won't be pleased about the delay and negative attention." "So we've won a reprieve, not a victory." Braxton nodded. "For now, but it buys you time to strengthen your position. The sheriff seems fair-minded. With his support and the testimony of those townsmen who witnessed the aftermath, public opinion might shift in your favor." "And you?" Tessa asked quietly. "Will you stay?" The question hung between them in the morning air. Braxton stared into his coffee, contemplating his answer. The events of the previous night had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose, of belonging, that he had deliberately denied himself for years. "I'm not one for putting down roots," he finally said, repeating his earlier words. "So you've said." Tessa's voice held a note of disappointment. "The drifter who avoids attachments. It served me well." "Has it?" She turned to face him fully. "You've been running for 15 years, Braxton." From memories, from connection, from the possibility of loss. But what have you gained in exchange? Loneliness. Empty hotel rooms and saloons where nobody knows your name. Her words struck uncomfortably close to the truth. It's simpler that way. Simpler isn't always better. Tessa set down her cup. When you rode in with me that first day, you said something that stayed with me. You said, "Love ain't for me," and I replied that perhaps it had been waiting too long already. Braxton remembered the exchange, though it had seemed insignificant at the time. "I wasn't just making conversation," Tessa continued. "I believe that important things come to us when we're ready for them, not necessarily when we want them. Maybe love has been waiting for you to stop running." The directness of her words caught him off guard. "Tessa." "I'm not asking for promises," she said quickly. "I'm just asking you to consider staying. Not forever if that's too much, just longer. Help me rebuild what Blackstone damaged. Help me prepare for whatever comes next." The sensible part of Braxton's mind urged caution, reminded him of the dangers of attachment, of the crushing loss he'd experienced once before. But another part he'd silenced for too long recognized something precious being offered. "I could stay through the harvest," he found himself saying. "Make sure Blackstone or his men don't return for revenge." Tessa's smile was like the sunrise spreading across the horizon, gradual, warming, full of promise. That would be a start. And somehow, in that moment, it felt like more than a start. It felt like a possibility he hadn't allowed himself to consider for far too long. In the months that followed, the Lazy Z slowly recovered from the attack. The damaged buildings were repaired, the bullet holes patched, and new glass installed in the broken windows. True to his word, Braxton stayed, overseeing security improvements and helping with the fall harvest. Blackstone faced charges but, as Braxton had predicted, avoided jail time through a combination of influential connections and well-paid lawyers. He was forced to pay damages to the Lazy Z, however, and the railroad commissioners, dismayed by the negative publicity, ordered a new survey that ultimately recommended an alternative route that bypassed Tessa's property entirely. As winter approached, bringing shorter days and colder nights, Braxton found himself increasingly comfortable at the Lazy Z. His temporary quarters in the bunkhouse had given way to a room in the main house at Tessa's insistence, ostensibly because it was more practical for the ranch's security. They settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural, sharing meals, discussing ranch business, and spending evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing. Tessa told stories of her childhood on the ranch, of her father's dreams and her mother's gentle wisdom. Gradually, Braxton found himself reciprocating, sharing carefully selected memories of his life before tragedy struck his early days as a lawman, the simple joy he'd found in marriage and fatherhood. One evening in early December, as they sat before a crackling fire after a particularly satisfying dinner, Tessa broached the subject they'd both been carefully avoiding. "The harvest is long finished," she observed casually, her attention seemingly focused on her needlework. Braxton glanced up from the gun he was cleaning. "It is. And Blackstone hasn't made any moves against us in months." "No, he hasn't." A comfortable silence fell between them again, broken only by the snap and pop of the burning logs. Finally, Tessa set aside her sewing. "You're planning to leave soon, aren't you?" The directness of the question shouldn't have surprised him, yet it did. Braxton carefully reassembled his revolver before answering. "I've been thinking about it," he admitted. "The spring cattle drive will need extra hands. Walter mentioned they could use someone with experience. The cattle drive isn't until April, planning ahead." Tessa studied him thoughtfully. "Is that the real reason? Or is it because you're feeling too comfortable here?" Braxton holstered his weapon, buying time to consider his response. Over the months, Tessa had developed an uncanny ability to see through his defenses, to read the truths he tried to conceal even from himself. "Maybe a bit of both," he finally conceded. "What are you afraid of, Braxton?" she asked softly. "That you might find happiness again. That you might care for someone and they might care for you in return." "I'm not afraid," he protested, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Aren't you? You've built walls so high around your heart that even you can't see over them anymore." Tessa rose from her chair and moved to stand before him. "But I've seen glimpses of the man behind those walls. A good man. A man capable of great love, despite what he tells himself." Braxton found himself unable to meet her gaze. "The last time I loved someone, it destroyed me. And you've been punishing yourself ever since." Her voice gentled further. "What happened to Beth and your son was a tragedy, Braxton. A horrible, senseless tragedy, but it wasn't your fault." "I should have been there," he said, the old guilt surfacing. "I should have protected them." "You can't protect everyone all the time, not even those you love most." She knelt before him, forcing him to look at her. "Beth wouldn't want this for you, this half-life, this endless penance. She would want you to live, to love again." The words struck him like physical blows, piercing the armor he'd maintained for so long. "You don't know what she would want, perhaps not, but I know what anyone who truly loves another would want for them." Tessa's hand tentatively covered his. "Life, joy, love, not endless solitude." Braxton looked down at their joined hands, hers smaller but strong, marked by honest work and determination. His larger, calloused, bearing the scars of violence and years of wandering. Yet somehow they fit together. "I don't know if I remember how," he admitted in a whisper. "To live, to love." "It's not something you forget," Tessa replied with a gentle smile. "It's like riding a horse. The body remembers even when the mind doubts." She rose then, releasing his hand. "I'm not asking for declarations or promises, Braxton. Just don't leave yet. Stay through the winter. Stay for Christmas. Then decide." Before he could respond, she leaned down and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his forehead. "Good night," she said simply, and left him sitting before the fire, more unsettled and yet more at peace than he had been in years. The winter proved to be one of the mildest in memory, with just enough snow to blanket the landscape in pristine white without making travel impossible. Christmas at the Lazy Z was a joyful affair, with Walter and the ranch hands joining Tessa and Braxton for a feast that rivaled anything from Braxton's memories. Tessa had decorated the house with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles, transforming the practical ranch home into something magical. She'd even managed to find gifts for everyone, practical items mostly, like new gloves or knives, but wrapped with care and presented with genuine warmth. For Braxton, she'd had a gunsmith in Springerville restore and engrave an old Colt revolver that had belonged to her father. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the weapon perfectly balanced in his hand. "This is too much," he'd protested when he unwrapped it. "It was gathering dust in a drawer," Tessa had replied with a smile. "Pa would have wanted it in the hands of someone who would appreciate it, someone who would use it to protect, not harm." Braxton's gift to her had been more modest, a silver hair comb he'd spotted in the general store, adorned with a small turquoise stone. Yet when she opened it, her reaction made anyone watching think he'd presented her with the crown jewels. "It's beautiful," she'd whispered, immediately removing the practical wooden comb from her hair and replacing it with his gift. The effect had been transformative, somehow emphasizing both her natural beauty and the feminine grace that her practical clothing and demeanor often obscured. As winter gradually yielded to spring, Braxton found himself making excuses to delay his departure. First, it was helping with repairs that the snow had prevented. Then it was assisting Walter with planning for the cattle drive. Later, it was breaking in the new horses that had been purchased from a neighboring ranch. Through it all, his relationship with Tessa evolved with the subtle inevitability of seasons changing. Their conversations grew deeper, their silences more comfortable. Occasionally, their hands would touch while passing a dish at dinner or working side by side, and neither would rush to pull away. One evening in early March, they rode to the top of a ridge overlooking the ranch. The sunset painted the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the distant creek that marked the eastern boundary of the Lazy Z. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Tessa said, her voice soft with appreciation. "No matter how many times I see it, the view never gets old." Braxton nodded, though his eyes had drifted from the landscape to her profile, gilded by the golden light. "No, it doesn't." She caught his gaze and held it, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You're not looking at the view, Braxton Mills." "I'm looking at something far more beautiful," he replied honestly, surprising himself with the directness of the compliment. A blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the fading light. "Careful. Talk like that might give a woman ideas." "What kind of ideas?" "That perhaps the wandering cowboy isn't planning to wander much further." Her tone was light, but the question beneath was serious. Braxton considered his answer carefully. Over the months, something fundamental had shifted within him. The walls he'd built around his heart hadn't exactly crumbled, but doors had appeared, doors that Tessa had somehow found the keys to open. "I've been thinking about that," he finally said. "About staying." Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly tempered with caution. "For how long? I don't know." He turned to face her fully. "Longer than I planned, maybe much longer." "Because of the ranch?" she asked. "Or is there another reason?" The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Braxton had spent 15 years avoiding precisely this kind of vulnerability, this opening of himself to potential loss. Yet with Tessa looking at him with those clear green eyes, he found the old fears receding. "You know the reason," he said quietly. She shook her head slightly. "I need to hear you say it, Braxton. After all this time, I need the words." Drawing a deep breath, Braxton reached for her hand. "Because of you, Tessa. Because somewhere between that first day in the saloon and now you've become important to me. More important than I thought anyone could be again." It wasn't quite a declaration of love, but it was more than he'd offered anyone in 15 years. For now, it seemed enough. Tessa's smile bloomed, radiant in the last light of day. "You've become important to me too," she replied. "More than I expected. More than I thought possible." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Braxton leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss that began gently, tentatively, but quickly deepened with the release of long-suppressed feelings. Her arms wound around his neck as his encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the first stars had appeared in the darkening sky above them. "We should head back," Braxton murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Yes," Tessa agreed, equally reluctant to break the moment. "Walter will worry if we're out after dark." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, their horses walking close together, occasionally brushing against each other as if mirroring the newfound closeness of their riders. That night marked a turning point. Though Braxton maintained his separate room in the house, propriety still mattered, especially on a ranch where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Their relationship deepened in ways both subtle and profound. Shared looks across the dinner table, fingers intertwined during evening walks, stolen kisses when they found moments of privacy. As April approached, and with it the planned cattle drive. Braxton found himself faced with a decision he'd been avoiding. The drive would take him away from the Lazy Z for at least 3 weeks, perhaps longer if they encountered problems along the route to the railhead in Holbrook. The night before he was set to leave with Walter and 3 of the ranch hands, Braxton found Tessa in the study, reviewing the ranch accounts by lamplight. She looked up as he entered, her smile warming him more effectively than any fire could have done. "All packed?" she asked, setting aside her ledger. "What little I have," he confirmed, taking the seat across from her desk. "Walter thinks we'll make good time if the weather holds. Should be back by the end of the month." Tessa nodded, though he could see the concern she tried to hide. Cattle drives were dangerous stampedes, river crossings, and the ever-present threat of rustlers all posed significant risks. "I'll be here when you return," she said, reaching across the desk to take his hand. "The garden will be planted by then. Maybe we can start talking about improvements to the north pasture." The casual way she included him in future plans wasn't lost on Braxton. She was giving him roots, responsibilities, reasons to return that went beyond their growing feelings for each other. "Tessa," he began, his voice serious. "When I get back, we need to talk about us, about what this is becoming." A shadow of uncertainty crossed her face. "That sounds ominous." "It's not meant to be." He squeezed her hand reassuringly, "Just the opposite. I've been thinking a lot about what you said about love waiting until we're ready. I think maybe I'm finally ready." The hope that blossomed in her expression was almost painful to witness, so pure, so vulnerable. "Are you saying what I think you're saying, Braxton Mills?" He nodded, finding courage in her reaction. "I'm saying that I love you, Tessa Zimmerman. I didn't expect to. I didn't want to, but somehow you found your way past all my defenses." Tears glistened in her eyes, though her smile remained radiant. "I love you too. I think I have almost since that first day, though I tried very hard not to." "I'm glad you failed," he said with a smile of his own. "So am I." She rose from her chair and came around the desk, allowing him to pull her onto his lap. "What happens when you return? Are you planning to stay permanently?" The question would have sent him running just months ago. Now it filled him with a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. "If you'll have me," he answered simply. "As what? Ranch hand, partner, or—" She hesitated, her courage faltering slightly. "Husband," Braxton supplied, the word both terrifying and exhilarating as it left his lips. "If you'll have me." Her arms tightened around his neck as she pressed her forehead to his. "I'll have you. As husband, partner, and occasionally ranch hand when we're short-handed." They both laughed, the joy of the moment dispelling the last of Braxton's reservations. This wasn't betraying what he'd had with Beth, it was honoring her memory by living fully again, by embracing love instead of running from it. "When we get back from the cattle drive," he promised, "we'll make it official. If that's what you want." "It's what I want," Tessa confirmed. "More than anything." The cattle drive proved challenging but ultimately successful. Unseasonable rain made river crossings treacherous, and they lost 3 head to a midnight stampede caused by a mountain lion, but the herd reached Holbrook intact and fetched a good price. Throughout the journey, Braxton found his thoughts constantly returning to Tessa and the Lazy Z. For the first time in memory, he was eager to complete a job not for the satisfaction of a task well done, but because it meant returning home, a concept that had been foreign to him for so long. Walter noticed the change, commenting on it one night as they sat by the campfire while the other hands slept nearby. "Never seen you so antsy to get a drive over with," the foreman observed, sipping his coffee. "Time was, you'd be looking for the next job before this one was finished." Braxton shrugged, not denying it. Times change, people change. Walter nodded sagely. Miss Tessa has that effect, reminds me of her mother that way. Jackson Zimmerman was a hard man until he met Elizabeth. She softened him without weakening him, if you take my meaning. I do, Braxton replied, thinking of how Tessa had accomplished the same feat with him, opening his heart without making him feel vulnerable for it. You planning on making an honest woman of her? Walter asked bluntly. Because if not, we might have a problem, you and me. Despite the implied threat, Braxton smiled. Already asked her, just waiting to get back to do it properly. Satisfaction spread across Walter's weathered features. Good. She deserves happiness. So do you, I reckon, though you seem determined to argue with it most of the time. Not anymore, Braxton assured him. Those days are behind me. True to his word, Braxton wasted no time upon their return to the Lazy Z. After cleaning up from the trail and changing into his one good shirt, he sought out Tessa, finding her in the garden where she was planting the last of the spring vegetables. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, her face breaking into a radiant smile that made his heart skip a beat. Dirt smudged one cheek, and her hair was coming loose from its practical bun, but to Braxton, she had never looked more beautiful. "You're back," she said, rising to her feet and removing her gardening gloves. "I was starting to worry." High water at the crossing delayed us, he explained, resisting the urge to take her in his arms immediately. He had something important to do first. But we got a good price for the herd. Walter's settling up with the men now. Tessa studied his face, noting his unusual formality. "Is something wrong? You seem different." "Nothing's wrong," he assured her. "In fact, for the first time in longer than I can remember, everything feels right." With that, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it carefully in his palm. It was a ring, simple but elegant, a gold band set with a small diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight. "I stopped in Holbrook before we left," he explained as Tessa's eyes widened. "Wanted to do this properly." Slowly, deliberately, Braxton lowered himself to one knee before her, there in the garden she had tended with such care. "Tessa Zimmerman, I came to your ranch as a drifter, a man running from his past and afraid of his future. You gave me purpose again. You helped me remember what it means to belong somewhere to someone." Tears began to gather in Tessa's eyes as she pressed one hand to her lips. "I love you," Braxton continued, his voice steady despite the emotions surging through him. "And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this ranch, building a family, building a future neither of us could manage alone." "Yes," Tessa whispered before he could formally ask. "Yes, Braxton Mills, I will marry you." He rose to his feet and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Perhaps, in some way, it had been waiting like love itself, for the right moment to find its home. Their kiss sealed the promise, witnessed only by the mountains that cradled the Lazy Z and the sky that stretched endlessly above them. They were married 3 weeks later in the Springerville church, a simple ceremony attended by the ranch hands, a few townsfolk who had stood by Tessa during the conflict with Blackstone, and even Sheriff Wilkins, who had become something of a friend. As spring melded into summer and then into fall, the Lazy Z flourished under their combined stewardship. Braxton's experience with security and management complemented Tessa's deep knowledge of the land and its cycles. Together, they expanded the herd, improved irrigation for the hay fields, and even began experimenting with new breeding stock to improve their cattle's hardiness. Word of their success spread, bringing offers from neighboring ranchers for partnerships and advice. Even Randall Blackstone, chastened by his legal troubles and the railroad's decision to pursue an alternative route, eventually approached them with a business proposition not to buy the land, but to supply beef for the workers constructing the line through Apache County. After careful consideration, they accepted the contract, turning a potential enemy into a grudging business associate. It wasn't friendship, but it was progress of a sort that benefited everyone involved. By the time winter returned, bringing with it their first anniversary, Tessa had news that completed Braxton's journey from lonely drifter to man with deep, unbreakable roots. "A baby," he repeated when she told him, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're sure, Doctor?" "Wilson confirmed it yesterday," she replied, her face glowing with happiness. "Come June, there will be 3 of us at the Lazy Z." For a moment, fear flickered in Braxton's heart, the old fear of loss, of vulnerability, but it was quickly overwhelmed by joy so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "A baby," he said again, this time with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on Tessa's still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Our future," Tessa corrected softly, covering his hand with hers. As they stood together before the fireplace, the snow falling gently outside their window, Braxton reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a man who believed love wasn't for him to a husband and soon-to-be father, from a drifter without roots to a man firmly planted in the rich soil of the Lazy Z. "What are you thinking?" Tessa asked, noting his contemplative expression. "About what you said that first day," he replied, drawing her closer. "About love waiting too long already." "And was I right?" Braxton smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "As usual, love was waiting. I just needed to stop running long enough to find it." Their son, William Jackson Mills, was born on a perfect June morning in 1879, strong and healthy with his mother's green eyes and his father's determined chin. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth Grace, named for both their mothers, a spirited child with copper hair and a laugh that filled the house with joy. The Lazy Z prospered under their care, becoming one of the most respected ranches in the territory. Braxton occasionally used his particular skills to help neighbors facing trouble or to assist Sheriff Wilkins with particularly difficult cases, but always returned to the ranch, to Tessa and their children, never again feeling the restless urge to drift that had defined so much of his life. In the spring of 1890, 13 years after Braxton first rode into Springerville, the family gathered on the same ridge where he and Tessa had shared their first kiss. The children raced ahead, now old enough to ride their own horses, while Braxton and Tessa followed at a more sedate pace. "Slow down, you two," Tessa called as William and Elizabeth urged their mounts into a gallop toward the summit. "They'll be fine," Braxton assured her, though he kept a watchful eye on their progress. "William's becoming quite the horseman." "Takes after his father," Tessa replied with a smile. "Elizabeth, too. She's got your restless spirit, though thankfully not your aversion to settling down." Braxton laughed, acknowledging the gentle teasing. "Good thing I found a reason to stay put. Several reasons, in fact." When they reached the top of the ridge, they found the children already dismounted, William pointing out landmarks to his younger sister with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the land that would one day be his responsibility. "And that creek marks our eastern boundary," he was explaining. "Pa says it's the best water in the territory, fed by mountain springs." "Can we swim in it?" Elizabeth asked, always ready for adventure. "When it's warmer," Tessa interjected as she and Braxton joined them. "And only with one of us present." The children accepted this with minimal protest, used to their mother's safety concerns being balanced by their father's willingness to let them explore within reasonable limits. As they spread out a picnic lunch, Braxton took a moment to absorb the scene, his family, healthy and happy, against the backdrop of the land that had become so much a part of them all. The lazy Z stretched before them, buildings maintained with care, cattle grazing contentedly in the distance, fields ready for spring planting. "Penny for your thoughts," Tessa said, settling beside him with a cup of coffee. "Just thinking how different my life would have been if I hadn't stopped in Springerville that day. If I'd kept riding, kept running." She nodded, understanding as always. "I've thought about that too. What if Vernon hadn't mentioned your name? What if I hadn't found the courage to approach you in the saloon? Then I'd still be drifting," Braxton said with certainty. "And you'd probably have found another way to save the ranch, perhaps, but I wouldn't have found you." She leaned against him, comfortable in the closeness they'd built over the years. And that would have been the greater loss. William and Elizabeth had wandered a short distance away, engaged in some game of their own invention involving stones and a stick. Their laughter carried on the spring breeze, a sound that never failed to warm Braxton's heart. The cowboy said, "Love ain't for me," Braxton quoted softly, remembering that pivotal conversation so long ago. Tessa picked up the thread without hesitation. She replied, "Then it's been waiting too long already." Their eyes met, the years falling away until they were again that wounded drifter and that determined rancher, standing at the crossroads of possibility. "You were right," Braxton acknowledged, taking her hand in his. "About everything." "Not everything," Tessa corrected with a smile. "But about the important things. About us." As the afternoon sun bathed the lazy Z in golden light, Braxton Mills, once a man convinced that love and happiness weren't meant for him, counted his blessings and found them beyond measure. The journey from that blood-soaked sunset when he first rode into Springerville to this peaceful family afternoon had been neither easy nor straightforward, but it had led him home in every sense of the word. And that, he reflected as he gathered his family close, was worth every step along the way.